we're going to talk mostly about the vanishing of Ethan Carter, but also about some things connected with it. I'd like to start with a question concerning your way to the vanishing of Ethan Carter. Throughout the development, when you were still quite secretive about what the actual game will look like, you were very much preoccupied with the difficulty of putting together gameplay and storytelling. Right? Sometimes you even presented this as a conflict that can't be solved, right? The gameplay as the enemy of storytelling. I remember some of your presentations like that. First of all, do you think they still are enemies? And secondly, do you think you found some kind of balance in the vanishing of Ethan Carter, marrying the two opposites?
Okay, so this is somewhat connected to the presentation I had last year. The big problem that we are facing, well, not everybody here, but everybody who's trying to tell a story through, in a video game, not through gameplay, in a video game, has this problem that our brain only has almost two states. One is emotional, and one is very calculating. As an example, not sure if you heard the story, but Gmail did something like this. They found out that on weekends, people are, well, getting drunk, and they are sending very emotional emails to their bosses or to their girlfriends or boyfriends, and they are breaking up. So a lot of heated emotions during the weekend. So what they've done as an experiment, they basically, before you could press send, they forced you to solve a couple of very simple equations. Like, for example, okay, 2 times 11. And just 3 of those, and you were forced to solve them and type in the results, and only then the send button, send email button, was unlocked. And it turned out that the amount of emotional heated emails dropped by 80%. Just this one little thing. Put your brain for 1 minute into this state. So I have to admit, I tried this with my daughter. She's 7 years old, and very often when she is actually very agitated or angry or crying, I do this simple trick, and I ask her, so, okay, I get it, but, you know, 2 times 3, and you do this like 2-3 times, and they will calm down. So that's how our brain is wired. And that's a big problem, because when you play a video game, most often than not, you are in this state, in this optimization state, because you're optimizing a very complex system that you're interacting with. So for example, you are playing a shooter, and you're analyzing enemy AI, and you don't treat them as humans really. So you think, okay, if I do this, then this guy will pop out of the cover, and if I throw a grenade, they will probably spread around. And you constantly think about the system. It's not emotions really, it's system. You're thinking about the system. So if a video game has gameplay mechanics, you cannot really get highly emotional. And that's a big problem of video games. With movies or books, it's all about emotions. So just let it flow. You're immersed in the world of the movie or game, or a book. Mm-hmm. And that works. But with the game, it's a big problem. So this is what we tried to tackle with Ethan Carter. Can we fucking do it? Is it even possible to have high emotions during the game? And I know many people right now want to raise their hand and tell me that they had this really amazing moment in a video game. And I bet you all the money in the world, half of these were a cutscene, and the other half often happened when the mechanics were not actually in play. So, and I'm talking about deeper emotions than anger, for example, here, because we all experienced that. So that's I'm not done yet.
Yeah, I know. It's just the introduction. Yeah.
But I'm moving forward. So my dream was to make a game that tries to merge storytelling and gameplay into one cohesive whole. So it's basically, it's story told through gameplay, or it's gameplay that's telling the story. It doesn't matter, but both are merged into one. That was just the first step for me. I definitely think we can go further, but that was the goal. And I think today, I would describe this challenge differently. So, can you make an emotional game that basically would not be easily portable to a book or a movie? So if you do this, then I think you have something very unique because it's an experience, emotional experience, told exclusively in the language of video games. Mm-hmm. And I think video games are potentially the most powerful storytelling medium. So we basically need to keep digging.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, again returning to the second part of the question, do you think you succeeded in The Vanishing of Ethan Carter with the integration of the puzzles within the emotional structure of the game?
Yes, yes. I think.
Okay. When you were talking about this difficulty of marrying mechanics and emotions, I also thought about This War of Mine, right? There are several examples of games which I think were quite successful in doing that. This War of Mine was a personal discovery for me because I was amazed at how well the mechanics actually conveyed an emotional message, right? Thinking in terms of this conflict between the two, This War of Mine would somehow render it invalid.
This War of Mine, I didn't play the game because I'm sure it's amazing. I just don't play these types of games. Mm-hmm. It's as simple as this. But I know about this game, of course. And I think what I've learned from this game is actually that people have a different threshold of when they get immersed. For example, for me, out of the movies that I saw, it was extremely hard for me to get the idea that I would be immersed in the world of This War of Mine because I saw the system there all the time. And I knew that I could really peek behind the curtain. It was very obvious to me. But there were people who actually were not bothered by this at all, which is actually, for me as a creator, a great news. Because that means that maybe we don't need to try as hard, right? Yes, This War of Mine is generally a good example of selling new types of emotions, emotions that we rarely see in video games, in a language of a video game.
And there's one more thing. I always have a problem with this expression, the language of video games, right? Whatever that is, because it's quite hard to say what we mean by language of video games, and the ways in which video games can go about storytelling. Usually we think about the language of video games, a language that is unique to video games, as the language of gameplay mechanics, right? That this is the thing. But I'm also more and more preoccupied, or for the last several years I've been more and more preoccupied about spatial exploration as one of the languages of video games, because actually no other form of culture, except for architecture perhaps, is based so much on exploring spaces, especially when you have 3D spaces. And environmental storytelling through spaces, has become more and more prominent in the video games industry. And it's also somehow outside this conflict, storytelling, creating a narrative, a sequential narrative versus gameplay. It's neither creating a sequential narrative, it's not really based on gameplay mechanics, it's, you could say, a third way, right? And I think there are more and more games showing that. Gone Home, for instance, right? We have a sequential story in Gone Home, told through the voiceovers, which I prefer to turn off because I think they're the least interesting thing in the whole game. But it tells much more interesting stories sometimes through the spaces, right? It was quite a discovery for me when I played it for the first time and I focused on the sequential plot told there, the love story, and then I talked to a Polish writer who is also quite a lot into video games, Łukasz Orbitowski, and he said his wow moment in Gone Home was when he went into the cellar and he saw these boxes full of unsold books, and this was his personal nightmare, right? Him being a writer. And this was something that was told just through the space, right? You didn't need anything else there. I think there's a growing awareness of that with games like Dear Esther, with games like Gone Home, with games like The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, to a certain extent, that the language of video games might be the language of walking and looking around, right? There's this slightly, or perhaps not slightly derogative term, walking simulators, referring to such games. Ethan Carter is in part a walking simulator. Do you think this is something that will develop? Do you think it will last, or do you think it's
okay? So walking simulators. I will tell you why. I will tell you why they will die very soon, but I will also explain why they will not die anytime soon. Mm-hmm. So okay. they are almost extinct because I mean it's a very clear formula in which you are this glorified. Jim Sterling called the hero a glorified cameraman, mm-hmm. who is basically an archaeologist. Mm-hmm. So something happened, and you go there and you explore a space. And note that Gone Home and Ethan Carter, the same kind of thing. And Tacoma, is it called, the new game from Fulbright? Mm-hmm. It's gonna look the same, and everybody's gone to the Rapture. It's gonna look the same, and yeah. Soma is gonna be the same thing. Uh-huh. So I think it's gonna get old very soon. Mm-hmm. That you're there, everything is old, shit already happened, and you are now exploring and figuring it out. I still think we will keep seeing that for many, many years. I just don't mm-hmm. think it's gonna be extremely popular. So. And let's be honest here. I mean, the main reason why developers do it is because they don't have money for, or people for, human characters, mm-hmm. and more interactivity and more systems. So they are just like, okay, let's build an environment and have the player walk around and discover stuff. So, but there is also this thing so what can save this? Mm-hmm. And actually we may see more walking simulators than ever. And that's virtual reality. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not sure how many people had the experience with VR, but we are developing Ethan Carter for VR. We are making a special version that's not going to be just a port of Ethan Carter to VR. It's not going to be a version when you just press a button and it's the same Ethan. It's going to be different. And the reason it's going to be different is that these old games are not working. And we have a slow game where you take everything on your own terms and you walk at your leisure, and it's still not good enough for VR because VR experiences are completely different. I think I tweeted something like this, that in the past we had movie directors and then we had game designers and directors, and we will have, I am deeply convinced, VR directors. People who try to port their shooter game from PC, for example, to touch devices, know that direct translation is not possible, right? The same thing with VR. So VR is much better for experiences than pure games. Hardcore shooters, a game like Tomb Raider, are going to be undoable on VR for many years to come. Of course, they are doable. It's just that most people will not be able to enjoy them. So I'm sure you heard that Epic has done with Veta. They have done this Lord of the Rings amazing VR thing and it was presented lately, and everybody was ecstatic about VR. But note that the hero is not moving at all. It's just there in the room, and cool shit is happening around the hero. So VR, exploration of space, absolutely bloody perfect for VR. So maybe VR will save or even allow growth of walking simulators. Mm-hmm.
And one more thing about Ethan, when I had to write an article about video games for a Polish cultural thing, an internet journal, Dwutygodnik, the biweekly. And they had this idea, which could be translated as the art of the center, of the middle, between the so-called high art and popular culture, right? And we were looking for some examples of video games which could also work like that. And one of the things that we came up with was Carter, which is somewhere between an artistic experiment like Dear Esther, right? I mean, Dear Esther, it got quite a following, but it was an art house following, right? It's part of it owing to the real quality of the game, part to snobbery. You were trying, I think, to build something like a bridge, right? Something like a game that could appeal both to the art house public and to the perhaps not hardcore gamer, but gamers, right, in general. Do you think there is a room for such a bridge in the market? Is there an audience for such projects?
I think there's a simple answer to that. So think about the movies that were both, well, let's not be ashamed of that word, deep, but at the same time, commercial and sort of basically fun. And I think we would be able to find a lot of examples of movies like that and books like that. So we do have a problem with video games. There's not a lot of video games like that. Yeah, but I think this will keep changing because, I mean, people will love to tell stories forever and ever. Mm-hmm. So we will keep trying to sell stories. And video games, as we know, I mean, since the very first game, we tried to sell a story. Mm-hmm. Because the first video game was called, what was it, Galaxy Wars or something?
No, it depends. I mean, there are many different ideas.
Okay. Let's not
cross and nods. You mean Space War, right? The first
maybe
with proper
maybe
graphics.
It was a Space War,
Space War.
But he didn't call it shoot at the dots, right? Mm-hmm. He called it Space War. So he already had a story in mind. So we will keep doing that, and we will get better at it, and we are getting better at it when it comes to storytelling. I think in a weird way, games got worse when it comes to gameplay. It blows my mind when people are excited about stuff that I experienced when Doom came out. Mm-hmm. So there is like almost a regress in gameplay mechanics. Mm-hmm. But storytelling-wise, I think we are getting better all the time. So I think we will indeed keep seeing more and more games in which the storytelling is more adult, deeper, better.
Yeah, because what was surprising for me was, as you mentioned, how few games like this you could actually find. I mean, the game market is very strongly, or perhaps not market, the world of games is very strongly polarized. On the one side, you have the artists who despise the commercial sector. On the other hand, you have the commercial sector which says, well, art does not monetize, so let's just skip it, right? So. Well,
but let's distinguish between good storytelling and artsy. Artsy does not really interest me as a creator or as a gamer. I mean, I can play something like this every now and then. A couple of hipster games are really good, but it doesn't interest me. What interests me is great storytelling, a storytelling that would really tell you something about the human condition, that will dig into deeper emotions in you. So I think in that department we will be pushing forward. But the hatred between artsy hipsters versus commercial sellouts, that's gonna last forever. I mean, it's there in movies, it's there in books. Artsy writers hate Dan Brown and probably vice versa. So that's gonna stay.
And now about the length of the game, which was quite a controversial point in many reviews. And you had this idea of making a game for busy adults, right? I was very happy. I have a 2-year-old son, and The Vanishing of Ethan Carter is one of the games I can play. The Witcher 3 is one of the games I can't really play unless I take my son and I say, well, there's this cool little horse here, let's take a look at the horse, right? And then we play Witcher 3. But at another event, at Pixel Night, you said that this audience, this audience of busy adults has proven to be a bit disappointing, right?
I mean, they are there, but the lesson I have from Ethan Carter when it comes to length of the game, it depends on your goals. If you want to conquer the world, and if you're counting on being the next DayZ, and I'm talking about indie success here, right? Next DayZ or something similar, then don't do what we did. Don't do a game like that. It's very simple, because there is a glass ceiling for games that are only a couple of hours long. And that ceiling is there, and it's gonna stay there. People are now able to pay $60 and play Witcher for 100 hours. And they optimize their money. We are not living in a very peaceful and rich world. So they're optimizing their money, and they will simply not do it. They will simply not go for it. I mean, many people did. We sold 250,000 copies on PC platform alone. So that's great. But there is this glass ceiling that you will not go above. So that's one thing. It doesn't matter in which way you achieve a long game. It can be something like DayZ that basically never ends, or it can be something like The Binding of Isaac, where each playing session is actually very short, but you can replay and it's randomized, and basically people are spending hundreds or even thousands of hours with this game. So as long as they have something like this, they can return to the game and still have a fresh experience, then basically that's the way to go. So as for the busy adults, my thinking was very simple. I mean, okay, there are people who like video games, but they have families. So the best game they could play would be a short game, because they would be thinking, it's a 4-hour investment, great, I'm gonna buy it, launch it, play it, and finish the game. On top of that, when you look at the statistics, if a video game, commercial AAA video game, achieves 30% completion ratio, that's actually a standard in the industry. So that basically means that 7 out of 10 people does not finish a AAA video game. It gets worse. Half of them do not get to the half of the game. So why the fuck are we spending tens of millions of dollars making these log games that half of these people don't see the half of it even, right? But it doesn't matter. You make it shorter, and yes, you will make sure that everybody finishes it, like Heavy Rain, for example, but you will hit the glass ceiling. So where was the mistake in my thinking, right? Because it's on the surface level, it's very rational, right? There's people, they have families, they have money, they still love video games, but they just don't have the time. And it turned out basically that they do the opposite of what I was thinking. They are actually buying games that are very, very long. Because when they launch a video game at night, right before they go to sleep, they want half an hour or an hour with the world they know very well. They do not want to invest emotionally in a new video game. They don't want to learn a new control scheme again. They just want something they know very, very well. And that's why these games like Call of Duty, Destiny, they all have this great success, because these people like invest themselves in these games, and it's like, okay, maybe I'll play one match, or maybe I'll just hang around DayZ for half an hour or something like this. So that's where these people, it's not about the money for them. So they have the money, but it's not about the money for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there's one subject that returns here quite frequently, especially at this event. The question of games being Polish, right? We're talking about the Polish market, Polish games. I think 2 years ago at Digital Dragons there was a discussion panel about the Polish school of game design, like the Polish film school, right? So it was quite prestigious. You have recently written a preface to a book on the history of Polish game design. So you sort of put your name under this idea. What do you think there is any point in talking about specifically Polish games? Is there anything, any kind of Polishness within them?
Polishness.
Innate Polishness, right?
It's a very good question, because we know that Poland is producing a lot of good video games, and bad video games too, but a lot of video games, which is, for example, not to say about Italy or Spain. Who can name an Italian game developer? And I'm sure there are game developers there. They're just not having the same volume of output as we are.
I think a very good mobile and also PC game book, Lone Wolf, it's Italian. Yeah.
Possibly.
Okay,
I mean,
so
it's a big country, but still, we are producing way more. So, and I would even risk it that we might look at Germans, for example, and see what happens there. The point is, we know that we are producing a lot of video games, and we know the world has noticed that. You had articles on VentureBeat or on Polygon. I mean, special features about this. So the world noticed. So why would we argue against it? So that's one. And we know a lot of these video games actually matter. So The Witcher or Dying Light, Ethan Carter or This War of Mine, they are actually noticed by the world. So we have also hypotheses. Why? Why is it that, what happened to Poland that it actually produces so many pretty cool games? So we speculated on that in the past. But is there something that unifies all these games, that this Polish factor, so to speak? Some time ago, I thought the distinctive element was the lack of Polish, and it's not a wordplay on purpose. It's that I do think that a lot of Polish companies, they do not know what it means to polish to AAA. And I think the first game that sort of did it was Dying Light. Witcher didn't do it. Witcher 3 still has a high lack of polish. I mean, it's a mind-blowing game, and everybody should buy it. But it's definitely not a polished game. So I think that was the problem. And I know that when Epic entered People Can Fly, we were shocked by what Polish means to them and how much money, resources, people, and everything they actually throw at that last Polish phase. But other than this, honestly, sorry, and I said a couple of years ago I would give you that answer, and I don't think after Assassin's Creed Unity and a couple of other games that it's exclusively a Polish problem, right? It's actually incomparable because Unity was a disaster, and I'm not sure we have released a AAA disaster ever. So, other than this, I actually, in an odd way, I don't see the Polish factor. I think Dying Light, if I didn't know it was Techland, I would easily buy that it's a game made by a UK, Spanish, or American studio. So obviously, The Witcher is I mean, it's very Slavic, so that's amazing, that's cool. But that's because the theme of the game is Polish folklore, right? So is there anything that links all these games, again, This War of Mine, Ethan Carter, and whatever you guys have done here, possibly that we are a little bit more random and a little bit more less afraid, a little bit more crazy, and a little bit more unpredictable. So when you look at Russian games, you see the suffering, and I think when you look at Polish game, it's this unpredictability that you can experience during the game, maybe.
And the second part of this question is how interesting or how profitable it is to sell some local elements. I mean, it definitely works with The Witcher, and I think it's not just the folklore, but it's also a certain it's part Sapkowski and part Bareja, right? I mean, the image of how this world works in terms of politics, in terms of what the ordinary people are like. It's this stereotypal Eastern European mess, right? And it works great, and it's something that has proven to be a very interesting and a refreshing thing in the fantasy genre. And of course, in Ethan Carter, you have these different elements taken straight from Polish context, and they are separated from this Polish context, right? And there are quite a lot of discussions, some of them serious, some of them absurd, sometimes accusing you of turning your back to your homeland, not calling Ethan Carter Janko Muzikant. It's essentially the
We went
same
from
plot,
Ethan Carter
right?
to Janko Muzikant. This is going.
I mean, it's a talented young boy in a provincial.
I get it.
Yeah, but I suppose it was a conscious decision to take these assets, these Polish assets, and put them into the game. And then it was a conscious decision not to present them as Polish, right? Could you explain these two decisions?
It was a very conscious decision because the flight ticket to the United States for the entire studio is much more expensive than gasoline to Karkonosze. So we basically went and scanned our own mountains. But we didn't. So we do it. We did it. We didn't do it with anything Polish specifically in mind. It wasn't our goal. It wasn't our goal to sell Polish culture in any way. I mean, I think I said it once. I'm not very patriotic because I don't. It still boggles my mind that people get attached to the place they were born. I mean, it's something they had no input or say whatsoever. So to me, it's ridiculous. You get born in US, you are this patriotic American. You get born in Poland, you're suddenly Poland is better. You know, Poland rocks. So it's. I'm not very patriotic. But we didn't do it because of that or anything. It's just that originally we actually wanted Ethan Carter to be a very universal game, that it takes place, it could take place in Europe or States with a little bit stretching of the stretch of imagination, maybe in Australia, maybe. But maybe. But in general, we wanted it to be nowhere specifically. But then a problem arose because I just realized that the game is called The Vanishing of Ethan Carter. So no, it can't. I don't know many Carters living in Pasikurowice Dolne. So we figured that we actually have to place the game in UK or US, and we chose US because of the nod to the weird fiction subgenre, and because Wisconsin is almost like Poland in a way that they have, 4 seasons and all. Now, should you use the local folklore, local culture, local visuals? I mean, I have no idea. If it works for your game, then great. It's a little bit risky, I have to warn you though. Because look what, the biggest market is America, of course, right? United States of America. And these are the people who really don't like reading subtitles, for example. So I'm not sure if they're that open to exploring Eastern Europe, for example. And when you look at the depiction of Eastern Europe in American cinema, for example, it's a series of movies like Hostel, when they basically murder people and torture them and mutilate them. So it's like this horrific barbarian terra incognita, right? So this might be interesting. I think the success of Stalker series shows that it can be interesting to the world. But it is a little bit risky when you go very specifically local.
Yeah, and this is another thing. I'm doing some research now on the representation of Eastern Europe in video games, and it's actually a bit like Latin America. It's a chaos that you have to discipline, right? Think Just Cause, for instance, right? You're there, you're a Latino, but you're American, and you bring order to this territory.
Well,
and the more ordered Eastern Europe actually becomes, the less attractive it becomes as a subject for video games, right?
Yeah, it's actually very, studying culture and how it could affect your game is extremely interesting because, lately we have this problem with The Witcher, right? That some reviewers have a problem that there are no people of color in the game. No. And the thing is that we don't get it because we walk down the streets of Warsaw and we don't see that many people of color. And imagine what happens outside Warsaw. So Poland is very homogeneous when it comes to ethnicity. But in States, it's completely different, right? So to them, it actually stands out that there are no people of color. The other example, when you make a horror game. So notice what's the difference between European horror and American horror. What is scary to Americans and what is scary to, let's say, Englishmen? So the icon of English horror, for example, is Jack the Ripper, Dr. Jekyll, and maybe Dorian Gray. And they all live in the city or in a big mansion. And in general, this environment is well known to them. So they are looking for psychological depth rather than environmental terror. Now look at American horror movies. Most of them actually happen in some forgotten woods or very small towns, some remote areas, Friday the 13th. And all of these movies are about some campers in the woods or whatever. So they are afraid by nature. Of nature. So, naughty by nature, sorry. So when you make a horror movie, horror game, you actually have to think about stuff like that. And I know we have this globalization process happening, but it's still not complete. So some of you might want to consider taking an outsider's look at your game, how it actually resonates culturally with different countries.
Okay, and then last question from me, and then we'll give some voice to the audience. And this question is about the promotion of the Vanishing of Ethan Carter. You took quite a particular strategy, especially with your blog, right? I mean, we knew that the astronauts had gone to the Sudety Mountains. We knew that. We didn't really know if the game was being made or not. We had one screenshot. And we also knew your opinion about lots of other games, right? And you kept the game as a complete secret for a very long time. I assume it was a conscious strategy, right, to promote it in this way. So any tips for promoting smaller indie games without a huge budget?
So marketing of the Vanishing of Ethan Carter was absolute nightmare for two reasons. First, for a long time we didn't have the game, which is kind of normal, but obviously in game development. But bigger studios, they can actually allocate a lot of resources for that particular E3 demo or the reveal gameplay or whatever. So, and we didn't have these resources. All resources we had were exclusively to make this game. So for a long time we didn't have the game. Also, on top of that, it's a mystery game. So every little thing we showed, it felt like a spoiler, basically. Then it's not a gigantic game, so we didn't really had a lot of these bullets, right? So there's limited amounts of things you do in the game. So how to market a product you don't have, and you shouldn't show to everybody, anybody. So that was really difficult. So what I've done is basically I applied, and there's probably more solutions. What I applied is something called a thought leader strategy. So thought leader is somebody who doesn't have a product, but knows something about this particular branch of industry and speaks loudly about this. So that's why we started the blog. And initially I blogged 2 times a week, which today is absolutely insane, but by today's standards. Right now I blog once per 2 months on our main website. As you probably know, I express myself elsewhere too. So, that's how it came to be, basically. I decided that I felt like I had the knowledge. I felt like I had something to say. And I invested a lot of time, effort, and money into a website that would look good and would resonate with people. And it turned out to be true, luckily for me. And we were still in the orbit of the hardcore gamers and journalists, because journalists, that's important part. So whenever there was a controversial topic, maybe gamers are trolls, or the opening of BioShock Infinite, people went there, read it, and talked about it. And it's by the guy who is working on the Vanishing of Ethan Carter. So we kept putting that name, the astronauts and the Vanishing of Ethan Carter, in front of them all the time, until we finally actually had a game, which we still could not show because of spoilers, right? So I think it was a lot of work, but I think I don't know how we could have done it any different, to be honest.
Okay, so now it's up to you. Any questions from the audience?
Right, thank you.
Thank you then.
Thank you very much.